12th anniversary coming right at us of Fukushima's multiple reactor cores, meltdowns, and 8 fuel pools. Chernobyl never had no fuel pools at the top of the new reactor that was 2 years old. Everybody's doing good. I'm your host, Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the nuclearproctologist.org. The nuclear industry grudgingly calls me the Gamma Goats, and you can call me 709-589-4406. We're going to cover the 12th anniversary of an extinction level event that takes a few decades to play out. We're well underway at this stage. I was going to take a deep breath after that one. We're going to cover the 12th anniversary is this Sunday. And so feel free to make an effigy of a nuclear scientist and burn it on that day and post the video on YouTube so we can all enjoy it. And if you can't do that, consider buying something from Japan and burning it, like the billion people will do in the near future. Get ahead of the curve, why don't you? So if you hear someone trying to convince you that Fukushima is like eating a banana, walking in sunshine, blah, blah, blah. Hello there. Oh, Mr. Dana. We got Maniac is here again. Goodbye, Maniac. This is a stalker who's been stalking me for a decade. From Japan. Mr. Tokyo himself, I think it is. Fukushima is like eating a banana, walking in sunshine, flying on an airplane. Consider launching a lawsuit against anybody that tries to convince you of that. Imagine, if you will, a world run by psychopaths, maniacs, cowards, and actual stupid, with a great education, but actually stupid, trying to convince you that everything is okay. So, I'm going to walk you through the Fukushima whack job story. It's not hard to understand if you come across someone like me, but if you listen to the madmen, the psychopaths, and the madmen, you're never going to be able to work it out on your own, unfortunately. So, in 2011, there was 10 major events. I'm just going to shoot you through that so you can see why it was difficult to understand what was happening. So you had a major earthquake. I'm going to play you a video from Al Jazeera of the Japanese media. The reporter, you can basically, is trying not to cry when they're telling, or they're interpreting, converting to English.
The Japanese Prime Minister appeared on TV to put into play a plan they'd rehearsed for years.
We will secure the safety of the people of Japan, and in order to minimize the damage, the government will make every effort possible. And we ask the people of Japan to continue to be cautious and vigilant and keep tuned in to the reports on the television and radio. And we ask the people of Japan to act calmly.
Now, in reality, it was total panic. You had a massive earthquake rip out 485 miles of the coastline. Rip it right off the coast up to 10 miles inland. And I'm just going to show you the buildings, give you some documentation, talk about radioactive fallout, and just take you through the Fukushima story as we lead up to this anniversary. Also, in 2011, U.S. forces allegedly killed Al-Qaeda.
So, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, I'm sure it did.
That's actually Hillary bragging about Osama bin Laden. Remember, wherever Hillary goes, genocide is sure to follow. We have a poll for everybody tonight. Can't Fukushima radioactive fallout kill people and species worldwide even 12 years after the nuclear meltdown? And I'll leave that up to you once I supply you with the documentation. The Egyptian president, which was a puppet for UN, Hossein Mubarak, quit but got arrested immediately after. But he was friends with everybody, right? Obama, Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, Carter. So they had to get rid of him. They needed a new puppet. President Ben Ali fled Tanzania, sparking copycat protests that became known as the Arab Spring. Muammar Gaddafi was executed in the most brutal way on public television. They hunted him down, used a knife to eviscerate his behind, and then while he was alive, used a 2x4 in the hole to carry him around on live TV, because he wasn't a player, right? Prince William and the puppet got married. His father now is the king. Imagine that, King Charles, the lunatic. And I say that because you got to realize he grew up, he had 155 servants his whole life dedicated to him. Imagine the ego of somebody like that. I like to say he had a servant to put a condom on him, for goodness sakes. The English riots hit their peaks at the same time, so this was a busy year. Steve Jobs died. Well, more like executed. He was emaciated when he died. You're talking about a multi-billionaire. It's hard to imagine he wasn't executed. The English riots began on the back of peaceful protests. No, the police were kicking the shit out of everybody in the United Kingdom. And the death of North Korea's leader. So it was a busy year. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I enjoy watching it personally, but not everybody has my sense of humor, I'm sure. You have ocean currents. Did you know the ocean currents were actually real? They're real. This is a German model of 6 years of just dispersal in the ocean. It didn't include the airborne radiation that is 19.5 days. So what's worse, I wonder, 19.5 days covering the entire planet or 6 years? Now, either way, it's a loss for all species. The scumbag nuclear industry came out with Noah's model. With Noah's model. Ohio. I wonder who that could be. So he called me from another number in a different state. Now he's got it's bizarre. So they showed the fake model over there of Noah, which was the tsunami model, claimed it was the radioactive fallout model, and then came out and broke everybody's bubble by saying, hey, stupid, it's a tsunami model. But meantime, NOAA had a real model out. They refused to acknowledge that it exists. But many countries came out with models right away. As you can see, the models of 19.5 days covering the entire planet. Everybody should sue Japan. Radioactive Xenon-133 in Washington was 450,000 times above detection level. It burns a hole through your lung, sequesters in your bones. So when it's in your bones, particularly children, it mutates to stem cells. And it doesn't never stops there, obviously. They've got a hole in their lung now. They got mutated stem cells. But when you got a huge amount, a massive amount, xenon, by the way, actually will go into the thyroid glands. So you end up making radioactive hormones right away. And your pituitary gland, of course, is storing these hormones, radioactive hormones. You can imagine the autoimmune illnesses and diseases and deficiencies and injuries. There's around 1,800. It's not just cancer. Fukushima Unit 1 and 2 exhaust stacks. This is not the reactor. This is quite a distance away from the reactors. They're exhaust stacks that are basically used for the fuel pools, because the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation 24 hours a day. The fuel is still split in the atom. Once you take it out of the containment, there's no containment. The fuel pool will boil, each fuel pool boils off about 120,000 liters a day into your biosphere. It never goes away. It's pulsing energy at the speed of light, almost 186,000 miles per second. High radiation dose rates in area at over 10 sieverts an hour. Now, 3 sieverts is a lethal dose for a short exposure, for instance. You'll die within a week or two. So imagine being one of the homeless or the destitute or the victims of society or the immigrants who don't speak the language, working at the disease factory known as Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. They had a massive earthquake. Now we're expecting another earthquake somewhere anywhere in the next week, the week and a half. Each year on the anniversary, within a week of the anniversary, they have a catastrophic earthquake in the same spot. It always does at least $5 billion worth of damage. There's always at least 5,000 to 9,000 buildings that need repairs or are destroyed. Why would you build multiple reactors in an earthquake zone that has over 1,000 significant earthquakes a year? It's still going on, and the buildings are fragile, as you'll see. And so an earthquake is a catastrophic event because it causes plumes. The red depiction squares are the bodies that were found. The yellow are the ones that are missing. To your left, you can see the depictions of the reactors in Japan. 480 miles of the coastline was stripped. Or put through the wood chipper. Outside of reactor 1, there was 4 reactors that melted down, not 3 like they're trying to convince you. And there was 8 fuel pools, which they refused to acknowledge. I'll show you that documentation. I'm trying to build you a picture so you can extrapolate on your own. This is not very difficult to learn. If you give me the moment, watch the show, you will walk away from this 1 billion times better and able, hopefully, to make informed decisions, protect yourself and your loved ones. Up to 1 million sieverts per hour outside the Fukushima Unit 1 containment vessel. It's still too hot to attempt measuring other areas. Well, 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. What do you think 1 million is? There's never been a nuclear scientist at Fukushima. Reactor 1 detonated. That was a detonation. That was the fuel, not hydrogen. Even though there is hydrogen created when the zirconium cladding starts to melt and catch fire. But it's, you know why a nuclear bomb is so explosive? It's because of uranium plutonium. So when it melts down, it's releasing this uranium and plutonium. And in that initial stage, there's oxygen. It displaces the oxygen. Once you introduce oxygen back into it, it'll detonate or a spark, and you had an earthquake. The recipe for disaster for all species. So reactor 1 detonated. This was really interesting. You had 1 million sieverts outside of this building. So they built this contraption off-site. Really, when you start looking, that's a person right there. Think about how actual big it is. That's just a fraction of the building, right? The buildings are actually 190 feet tall. Now they're going to put a Kevlar sarcophagus around that with panels. That's going to be laid there. There's no humans working there. Remember, these stacks are around 10 sieverts. You can't walk past it without getting a lethal dose. So imagine how bad the reactors are actually going to be. They put this Kevlar sarcophagus, so to speak, for 5 years, and then they dismantle it. It's currently open to the environment. They haven't been able to do any work there. It's a lot of it's gone China syndrome down into the earth. And I'll give you the evidence for that in a little tiny bit. This is reactor 2. Reactor 2 burnt continuously for days. The only thing that could burn for days inside of this would have been the fuel pools and the reactor core. A lot of the inventory was lost. These panels are massive panels, by the way. Unit 2 completely liquefied, both the reactor core and the fuel pool. Now, if you're not familiar with the fuel pool, and you're talking about 4 decades of reactor cores, there's 2 fuel pools at the top of each building. You can see the heat signature at the very top right-hand corner. So the fuel pools are stuffed, both of them, because they don't have a repository in Japan, let alone anywhere else on the planet. So the fuel pools are at the top, and so is the reactor core. We'll get to this picture in a second. Worst case scenario, likely a reality, the entire nuclear core injected into the environment. And I want people to understand that I rarely have an opinion. I provide you with documentation and explain it to you, move on to the next documentation. There's no conjectures here. We deal only with facts because you can't make up the madness. So why would you want to? What's the point of talking about something you don't know nothing about? How are you supposed to educate a population? So I go through a lot of work, an absurd amount of work, to find the documentation and bring it to you so you have a visual and you can make up your mind. So my assertions are usually providing the documentation. So instead of a 190-foot building with a reactor core at the top and 2 fuel pools, you got a stump. You can see why Japan is calling me, interrupting my shows. They hate the fact that someone understands the story, and that means you. So at the top of the building was 2 fuel pools. They're stuffed because they don't have a repository. The reactor 3, by the way, was the mixed oxide fuel reactor. Mixed oxide fuel. So what that means is that particular reactor was reclaiming uranium and plutonium that had already gone through a chain reaction, was used in bombs and fuel, reused fuel. So you're reclaiming these hot particles. Now the problem with it is that once you put it through the chain reaction, it's very volatile. And in the context of poison, it's considered 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Which means a single atom is catastrophic to everything with replicating cells. You can put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it. And each atom is catastrophic to all species, including, and not limited to, the bacteria and the fungus in your forest. And what we've seen after Fukushima, the radioactive fallout, wrecked the fungus and the bacteria in the forest. And what that means is the forest litter and foliage doesn't break down anymore because there's no ecosystem there, because you got rid of most of the bacteria and the fungus. And so you might have heavy rains, but the rain doesn't get soaked up because you don't have the ecosystem anymore. So the foliage, the litter is not breaking down. Eventually, over the years, you start getting lightning strikes. The forest fires become incredible. And the problem with forest fires on this planet is there's 80 years of fallout sequestered in the trees and the leaves and the roots. The forest fire will liberate the radiation back into the environment, because fire, incinerators, and even battery acids, you can't destroy anthropogenic man-made radiation, which is what we're talking about. And anthropogenic man-made radiation has nothing to do whatsoever with the natural elements on the periodic tables. We call it man-made because the sun doesn't create these elements. These elements are not in stardust. These are man-made. And so in order to hoodwink you, they conflate natural elements with the anthropogenic man-made elements. And that's deception, right? That's misrepresentation. That's the entire legacy, the entire history of the industry is predicated upon deceit and misrepresentation and dishonesty. It's a very disrespectful industry. The industry has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. So they faked the reactor 3. What they done was they built this contraption off-site, like reactor 1 contraption, right? You see, they built that off-site, brought it and assembled it with cranes. They done the same thing for this one. The idea was to make you complacent. Remember, they're wearing tungsten vests outside of that reactor 3. Again, this is not going to protect you. You have to have a full-body suit on. Everything has to be equally protected. You can't have, because you're talking about X-rays and gamma shines and neutron bursts that can go through 8 feet of lead. The tungsten vest is meant just to stop them from dropping dead on site. They'll drop dead later that day. Now, they're claiming the media, of course, we come out and ridicule this. Worldwide, the media came out and claimed that they were on top of Reactor 3 getting the fuel out of a pool that doesn't even exist. When you zoom in on the picture, what you see is the deceit. In fact, some of the media showed this particular set of pictures where they're claiming people in paper suits are walking out of a nuclear meltdown. First off, standing here is a lethal dose. Doomsday-like radiation released if the fire in the pool at Unit 4. It would be a global catastrophe. Global catastrophe. And worldwide, I'm confused that people are not protesting this despicable, disgusting industry all day, every day. Everywhere, every facet of it. Every university should have a full-time protest all day, every day. The nuclear industry's entire legacy is how do they exterminate you without you working it out. The trolls are exactly that. They're in it for a paycheck and they couldn't care less about you or anything else. They're the equivalent of a meteorite coming at your planet. You can't see them coming. And they're out there wrecking everything they touch. And their parents done the same thing. Their parents done the same thing. So consider subscribing and clicking the bell. Not that it'll actually work most times. And try giving me a like. Works sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. I'm censored, period. I'm a little confused why the world is not reposting my material everywhere. But I guess that's just the way it is when Spider-Man and the Hulk that were created by the industry is the average person's hero. Remember, krypton is lethal to children, the radioactive fallout. The nuclear industry created all of these caricatures to disenfranchise your loved ones and your children from reality and the true heroes in their life. Unless you got a cape on, or you come from the Hollywood studios, you can't be a hero. The word hero has been diluted by things like GoPro hero and guitar hero. Oh, I remember when I was young, when we had a problem, we got rid of the problem, and it wasn't a problem anymore. It didn't fester, and we didn't let it last long enough to have kids so that they can do it to us too. Doomsday-like radiation if Reactor 4 released. Well, there's Reactor 4. It's gone. The fuel pools would have been at the top of the buildings. Now imagine the people to the right. These are most likely photoshopped because you can't survive there with paper suits on. You got to realize you're going to die in a week or two from a short exposure to this stuff. I personally went to Reactor 4 and almost died.
So I'm actually at Unit 4. This is Unit 4. Now I'm going to show you a video of CNN claiming they're inside of this building. Now if you go inside this building for 2 seconds, you will die. You'll never come out of there. We can't go get you. But here's CNN with fake news. This is fake news, and here we go.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011, leading to the country's worst nuclear disaster.
And so she can't be at a building that don't exist. She's not the only one. There's endless amounts of media that told the same lie. All your favorite useful nuclear idiots were out there telling the same lie. Arnie Gunnison, Helen Caldicott, Christopher Busby, all of them pretends the building looks perfect instead of what it actually looks like. If that doesn't concern you, then you need to go back and watch the video again. You missed a whole lot. Reactor 3 and Reactor 4, they put fake covers on it and then pretended that everything was okay. Fukushima plant work to go on for 10,000 years, longer than human history. Well, the radioactive fallout, this is a plutonium-239 dispersal covering the entire planet. I think that's a 21-day model. Let me bring it up very quick. Yep, 21 days of radioactive, just plutonium. It's impossible to move the hundreds of radioactive material, let alone the 1,200 radionuclides, claiming they can reduce the radiation from what's known as the ELP system. Well, first off, the whole planet got covered with radioactive fallout right away, right? But let's talk about right shortly the ELP system, so that you can appreciate how big of a lie that particular story actually is. And, you know, they did try, but the ones that were trying didn't understand the big picture. It can't work. And the reason it can't work is because of they're pouring water over a reactor core. Then they have the wells dug around the site so they can measure the water that's running under the site into the ocean. That's what the wells are for. What they decided to do was claim that they're pumping all the water up and it's going into a water filtration system. Half of it is poured back on the nuclear meltdowns at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. And the other half is going into the tanks. And they just keep repeating the process over and over and over. Now, the problem with the story is it's got more than a few holes in it. So let's just talk about the filtration system for a minute so you can wrap your mind around that. So there was the Surrey system with an A, Surrey system, was supposed to filter out the fabled unicorn cesium-137. The 137, there's a lot of it. It's a very terrible isotope with a 300-year lifespan, a 30-year half-life. There's 10 half-lives. How often have you heard the nuclear industry say that? Some have 20 half-lives. TEPCO to abandon the Riva system amid contaminated water systems. So the Riva system was equivalent of the ALPS system, but it was France's system. That's 2014. So in 2014, the last 3 years, the system has been unused. The ALPS system, 2014, had the same attributes. It has yet to function. The problem is that if you're running 2 sieverts of beta, because that's all they admit to, per liter through a filter, within a few hours the filters is tens of thousands of sieverts. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. The filter needs 8 feet of lead shielding so people can run past it. But you can't actually change the filter. Now you're running these pouring water over the reactor core, whatever garden hose or whatever it is that they're using, because the equivalent that they're talking about is equal to a garden hose split 4 ways. It's a total lie, every facet of the story, but I want to explain to you what they're actually, how the stories have evolved a little bit. So there's no Riva system, no series system, there's no ALPS system. It didn't work, right? And the reason it wouldn't work and couldn't work is multiple reasons. First off, the hoses that are pumping the water allegedly to the Riva or the ALPS system are so radioactive you can't cross over. It's a lethal dose within 20, 40 feet of it. That's the hoses that are running from the site to the so-called system. The filter becomes impossible. Now, and the whole components, everything that the water touches, because it's in contact with the fission material, is now putting out gamma shines, X-rays, and neutron bursts. It's lethal doses. If you chop up a foot of it, take it to a subway, any part of the infrastructure, it's pulsing energy so much it'll kill everybody at a subway station all day that walks past it for millions of years. These are genocide machines. So a 5-gallon jerry can of the water is so lethal, it has those same attributes. It will kill everybody that walks past it for millions of years. They also allegedly were going to do a bypass operation. Now the problem is, if you build a fence or a bypass, so-called, the water goes under the fence, right? The site was built on an old riverbed. They built it up about, in some places, quite high. So they put down a huge layer of crushed rock because they're in an earthquake zone, right? So they put down this huge amount of crushed rock. So everything that washes down through it, because it rains and typhoons and snow and regular weather and fog, and it's on a natural mountainside with an old riverbed. Most nuclear plants will build them this type of way. So if it melts down, it'll go down to the riverbed. The water runs over the reactor core and out into the lakes, rivers, or estuaries and oceans. That's their so-called oh shit plan. And then they run away. And that's the engineers who designed it are still alive and should be held accountable in the worst possible way. So building a bypass operation having no effect. Allegedly going to build $1 billion fence. Well, first off, because you can put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see, but each atom is deadly. You can't filter, though, that you can't even see it on the head of a needle, so how are you going to filter it? Well, you have to catch everything. Nothing can escape. Of course, we know that some of these materials are able to escape metal containers. like the CANDU reactors here in Canada are known to do. TEPCO ice wall. Now, why would you build an ice wall instead of a real wall? Yeah, maybe there's certain infrastructure where an ice wall might be applicable, but why would you build an ice wall when you could build a real wall? You got to keep it frozen. If the problem with a frozen ice wall is it causes neutron bombardment to shine back into the uranium, which can cause a chain reaction, which will melt down the pipes you're using for an idiot ice wall. The money they spent on the ice wall, they said they hired 260,000 people. 260,000 people to build a wall. Instead of a couple of hundred to build a real wall, they hired 260,000 people. And when you looked at the money they used, it worked out to $1,140 a person if you don't build the wall. It's $9 million a year just to do the maintenance on the wall, just to keep it working, he says. It's a complete absurd lie and deceit and deception. Officials unsure what to do next. Korea calls Japan's handling of Fukushima incompetent. So imagine the whole world is covered in radioactive fallout. How bad is it in these evacuated communities that they're trying to move, are moving 20% of the population back into, that are complacent and have fell for the propaganda? Bashchuk Punjab from the UN had an eloquent dissent. I'll play that for you.
His name is Mr. Bashkuk Tunjak.
Earlier this morning, the mandate issued a press release on the situation in Fukushima, and this is one of the cases that's mentioned in the report. In the press release, we're urging the Japanese authorities to halt the relocation of children and women of reproductive age to areas of Fukushima that exceed levels of radiation that were considered safe before the nuclear disaster. After the nuclear disaster, the government of Japan raised the acceptable level of exposure from 1 millisievert per year to 20 millisieverts per year. And we're quite concerned, in particular for the health and well-being of children who may be raised or born in Fukushima.
Well, there's more bad news. So what they're talking about is the insane, lunatic, coward nuclear industries insisted upon moving the most vulnerable back into the nuclear wasteland, which won't surprise you when you start realizing what's actually going on there. They're growing food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation in a no-go zone in the middle of a massive nuclear wasteland. 14 prefectures were banned. The food from it was banned by 55 countries. Not Canada, but 55 real countries. Canada removed all restrictions after 93 days. That's why you're seeing everybody get sick across Canada with catastrophic. That's why you're seeing so many people dropping dead of heart attacks in clusters. In a single week, we had one community here in a 2-week period last year that 5 people dropped dead under the age of 50 in the garden, in their shed, out for a walk, just randomly dropping dead, and a tiny community at that. Never heard tell of in history, but Japan. Here's Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson removed the restrictions on baby food from Fukushima, which is in the middle of the 14 barred prefectures. 2 years ago. He removed it for baby food and cereal. This was just before he got ousted out of the United Kingdom Parliament. He's promoting Fukushima juice. He doesn't even know what it is, but watch him. It's revolting, really.
Fantastic, delicious. Is this peach juice or what?
Yes, it is.
Nectar. This is delicious. Cheers, everybody. Okay. Here's to everybody in Fukushima. Delicious. Yum. Very.
He barely took a sip. on top of that. He didn't even know what it was. Peaches! Nectar! And Boris Johnson has done this before, right? He removed all restrictions for baby food 2 years before he removed it for adults. It was actually baby food and cereal 2 years before he removed it for the adults, which was last year. Like 100% unequivocally should be charged with crimes against humanity. Send us people who don't mind dying. Does that sound like they're asking for nuclear scientists and academics and journalists? New improved version of the original atomic plague is spreading. The truth is so incomprehensible, it's easier to pretend it doesn't even exist. And it's pretty obvious that that's true, right? The censorship on top of me is not normal. This is desperation. EU's the E restrictions on food imports from Japan. Iceland, Norway, and other non-EU European countries will also make a similar... This was last year. 4 years ago, the Fukushima government, the government of Japan, had opened a sake shop in New York because they couldn't get rid of their radioactive sake. So the degenerate Fukushima prefectural government actually opened a sake shop in New York City, specializing in food from a nuclear wasteland. Despite the fact that the degenerate International Atomic Energy Agency, aka lunatic UN, today admitted there is no such thing as a safe level of radiation. And that the actual standards of radiation are based on benefit, not safety. Well, there is no benefit with anthropogenic man-made radiation. So it's based on natural, harmless, stupid, indigenous, everyday background radiation that everybody and everything on the planet is acclimated to already through genetic superior selection. U.S. lifts the post-Fukushima import restrictions on Japanese products last year from 14 prefectures. And the 13 other prefectures are listed there for you. Canadian newspapers tried to get soil tested for radiation after Fukushima melted down. Private companies, government agencies, universities all refused to get involved. Think about that statement. No dissenting voices allowed. Think about this picture where they're growing food in a nuclear wasteland, in a no-go zone, surrounded by a nuclear wasteland, right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation on top of that, for sale. Soil from the Fukushima radiation decontamination work to be reused in the nuclear, or in farmland. We call them nuclear farmlands. So they're going to take soil from millions and millions of 1-ton bags of radiation, and they're doing it within eyesight, 2 miles, 2 kilometers from the ongoing nuclear meltdowns in Okuma and Futaba. A farmland development project testing the reusability of radioactive soil from the meltdowns, carried out by no less than the Environment Ministry in a restricted, difficult-to-return zone. If that's not the most lunatic statement imaginable, what actually is? It seemed like all the rules came off the table when Fukushima happened. They just said, the hell with all people, including ourselves. September 21st, 2021, the U.S. FDA lifted Japanese food import restrictions, but none of that was ever reported in the American media or the British media or the Canadian media. Rice planted and evacuated a Fukushima town. Rice planted in a nuclear wasteland. Okay. UN finds no adverse health effects. That was 2021, they came out with all kinds of headlines. UN, Fukushima didn't hurt nothing. UN, right? Okay. It was really sadistic. This is Boris' handshake with Kishida from Japan, removing all the restrictions from the entire 14 prefectures and everything else. The steam that's coming out of the ground from the chain reaction is at 4.7 sieverts per hour. That's proof of a China syndrome, see? It was 6 places the steam was coming out at 10 sieverts per hour. TEPCO has worked vigilantly to shut out scrutiny of the ravaged plant conditions. You probably, if you've been here since the beginning, you notice we had phone calls from Japan trying to vilify me. All I'm trying to do is show the documentation. I have every right to do it, and I have an obligation. I'm obligated to show you this because nobody else is doing it for you. The intelligence agency pressured researchers. Well, they gave me gag orders. Nobody was allowed to have a conversation. 12 million yen to censor Twitter when they were burning radioactive debris. That's around 54,000 US at the time. Do you really think Twitter gave up that easy money by just censoring me and a couple more people? Agencies funding projects to monitor online information about Fukushima. Around-the-clock monitoring of blogs on nuclear power and Twitter accounts. Guess what I do around the clock? Guess who else they got to pick on? Not nobody. Look, and then the apologists, the lunatics, will come out and say, we're all radioactive, so stop being afraid of it. And you have degenerate scum like Geraldine Thomas from United Kingdom, a degenerate pro-nuclear lobbying entity who also radiates children in the United Kingdom's hospitals for kicks on the side, and is a professor that teaches nuclear. Can you imagine a creature?
So, for example, coming here, I would have got a dose of 0.07 millisieverts on the flight.
Of course, it doesn't work that way. Like, radiation is physical, right? It's physical. And that means you can breathe it in, you can eat it. Unisievers and microsieverts and millisieverts and stuff like that are gamma shines or X-rays and neutron bursts and beta shine and stuff like that. You can't conflate natural stuff with man-made, and that's exactly what this human excrement is.
And I actually went round Fukushima Daiichi on Wednesday, and the dose that I had going around the site, so very close to where the reactors are, it was 0.01 and probably lower, but that's the lowest it could actually read.
And so that filthy scumbag should be, everybody in the United Kingdom should be trying to sue her. It's the epitome of a scumbag. There's 4 sides to reactor 4. You'll never see that anywhere else. That's the original pictures of reactor 4 to your left and reactor 3 to your right. They felt the explosion of reactor 3 25 miles away. And that's what's left is this little stump. But yet they claim they got all the fuel out of the fuel pool.
So, for example, coming here, I would have got a dose of 0.07 millisieverts on the flight. And I actually went round Fukushima Daiichi on Wednesday.
She actually went around the multiple nuclear meltdowns, which is an absolute, unbelievable, hideous, monstrous lie. Do you see the building to the left? Helen Caldicott, probably the most famous nuclear activist on the planet, has insisted in hundreds of interviews that the buildings look like the building to the right, not to the left. This is just one of the many radio interviews where she purposely tells this lie. The original footage is in the top center. I put the two pictures there so you can see the truth. She's
Let me ask you this. You've said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. Think we would ever know the truth of what's going on there? And the reason I ask is because we've seen coverage in the national news media here in the United States from ABC News and others that take video cameras in, saying that they're being given exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
Well, the only problem with it, there is no top to the building starters. You can't make it look pristine. And she's done this in hundreds of radio interviews. What do you think she's really up to? David Suzuki said that if this building collapsed, and you can tell it's collapsed, you should evacuate the coastline of the Northern Hemisphere.
So just to recap, when you look at the pictures, all of...
Oh, I usually don't play that particular clip. Let's play it anyway.
Number 4 is missing, and all of number 3 is missing. And so the fuel pools were up close to the top of the building. They're long gone. David, I think you had something you wanted to say.
That the fear is if there's another earthquake of a 7 or above, that building will go, and then all hell breaks loose. And the probability of a 7 or above earthquake in the next 3 years is over 95%. I have seen a paper which says that if, in fact, the 4th plant goes under an earthquake and those rods are exposed, it's bye-bye Japan, and everybody on the west coast of North America should evacuate.
Well, I don't know if you noticed it, but reactor 4 is gone, and so is reactor 3. And reactor 3 is the mixed oxide fuel. It's infinitely worse than reactor 4, and reactor 4 ain't no cakewalk. It had 2 fuel pools like reactor 3, but it wasn't mixed oxide fuel. Mixed oxide is 2 billion times worse than reactor 4. Because you're using reclaimed uranium and plutonium. So all I'm trying to do tonight was put out a succinct video of just what is Fukushima. And this is the 12th anniversary. We'll be doing this the whole week, and then Sunday is the anniversary. Okay, so I'm not going to take you down the rabbit hole tonight in particular, but I've done research expeditions from the radioactive fallout. The species to your left are exterminated. I went back for 6 years from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. And you can see the species to the left, they're actually exterminated. Did you hear what I said? They're exterminated. Is nuclear worth sacrificing all the species to your left? Was it worth, that was an average day for me, by the way. Was it worth sacrificing all the species to your left? They're exterminated. That's permanent. That's because of Fukushima. But the story is much more sadder than what that is, and that's as sad as it gets, you would imagine, right? Hang on. Fukushima tap water wins gold award selection from a nuclear meltdown. So you can see how crazy the industry actually is. West Coast gray whale population plummeted by thousands. It was around 11,000 gray whales. There's a mortality event for gray whales, for humpback whales, for covert beak whales, for minke whales, for right whales, for many species. And now they flipped the lie and claiming that it's the bird flu. So in that year, it was 6,000 in 2021, but that got revised last year to over 10,000. It's around 11,000 confirmed dead. They were emaciated. They died because of radioactive fallout. That model is based upon 20 days after the meltdowns. The radiation never stopped coming out. And this model is based on about 21 days of Neptunium-239 after 22 days decays to plutonium-239 with a 24,000 year half-life. And by the way, there's 10 half-lives. That's another model from Norwegian Institute of Air Research. We've seen Tokyo hammered. And so you don't want to eat food from Japan. And remember, all nuclear power plants need 2 gas, oil, or coal plants just to run. They dedicated to them to build them, they dedicated to them to run them for the lifespan, and dedicated for another 60 to 100 years to decommission them. You're being hoodwinked and poisoned. Ottawa, Canada had academic studies showing 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129. One out of Vancouver was 20 million atoms of iodine-131 per liter sustained for many months. And so for every iodine-131, there's 10 times more iodine-132, 30 times more iodine-133, 31 times more iodine-129, like the Ottawa study confirmed, by the way. And that the 132-133 iodine is 9 times more effective at ionizing radiating the thyroid gland than the brutally effective 131 was. With 10 half-lives, it has no problem covering the planet. The research expeditions we were on shows we are in the 6th extinction event, and the cover-up is in 2nd gear. This has been going on for 80 years, this deceit and dishonesty and manipulation and deception. A single liter was at 2 sieverts an hour, but they're only acknowledging beta. And so if you fill up the tank with this kind of stuff, because the filtration system, as I showed you earlier, didn't work. If you fill up a tank and you're only talking about beta instead of everything like gammas, x-rays, and neutrons, and alpha, which means the liter is going to be around 10 sieverts per liter, if you actually were going to be honest. But at just 2.2 sieverts, which is the official numbers, I'm not going to dig it up today for you, but we show it many times. 2.2 sieverts of just beta means the tanks are 1.4 million sieverts, which means you can't get back on the site and you can't build another tank. So the fact that they have more than one tank, which, by the way, the tanks were all built. The tanks were all built in 2013. 2013, they had 1,000 tanks. 2014, they had 1,200 tanks. So look at the name, Mari Yamaguchi. She's the cover story from AP. She's always the first to break the propaganda stories, by the way, for anybody that's taking notes. 2017, they had 900 tanks. 2020 or 19, they had 1,000 tanks in that line right here. In 2021, they had 1,300 tanks, or I'm sorry, 1,000 tanks. So all the tanks, they had 1,000 tanks in 2013, 1,000 tanks in 2023. How many tanks did they build in the last 10 years? The amount of water they claim was going into the tanks was the equivalent of a garden hose, like the typical half-inch garden hose you have in your house. The reactors, before they melted down, needed 4,600 tons a minute. A garden hose can deliver about 150 tons a day. The reactors, each of them, will need 4,600 tons, 1 million gallons each minute, 1,440 minutes a day. In other words, a single reactor could fill up all the tanks 6 times a day in normal operating conditions. You're been hoodwinked and poisoned by the most deadly poison in human history. That's at least 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison, according to the EPA's website itself. Try walking with both of your feet flat on the ground. See how that works for you. The industry wouldn't lie to us, Dana. No, that's all they've done for 80 years. They are professional scum, and now they are professional exterminators. So I didn't want to put up a long video tonight. I want to put up because I can go 2 hours pretty easy. All I wanted to put up was just the basic foundation, because I feel very strongly that a normal person, once they learned that bit of information that I shared today, can extrapolate the facts themselves. And anybody with a reasonable IQ could do it, except for apparently everybody in the nuclear industry. Remember your Atoms for Humanity. That A-10 only shoots dirty bombs. It only shoots depleted uranium munitions, which for some reason used to be called DOLRAM, not DU. Depleted uranium, low-level radioactive material, and nothing that comes from nuclear meltdowns is low-level. Everything is a hot particle. So why are they growing food in a nuclear wasteland and shipping it worldwide? You need to reconcile that one. And if you think I'm wrong, go down and write on the 30 million one-ton bags that Dana Durnford is wrong. Radiation good, data bad. I'll get you a plane ticket. I'll pay for it myself if that's your cup of joe. And we raised $162 last night from James Lucid. We sent a great big thank you to James. And that's the show for tonight. I wanted to put out a short video to articulate it. We're going to close the poll here in a minute. And we're going to come back again tomorrow night with another curb-stomping show of the nuclear industry. Let's go back over to the poll. Can Fukushima radioactive fallout kill people and species worldwide even 12 million years after the nuclear meltdown? The answer is yes. It kills everything for long past the human experience. It's a great poll. 98% were honest. The other 2% are a lost cause, which was probably Tokyo stalker that called us at the beginning of the show. Yeah, the first number was from Detroit. The next one from Ohio. He's done that a number of times now, haven't he? He's from the Tokyo Bureau, so it's the Japanese government is what he's alluding to. Most likely the Japanese embassy. And they got no one to pick on, so you know they're going to come after me, right? Let's close the poll down. One more poll bites the dust. Can Fukushima radioactive fallout kill people and species worldwide even 12 years after the meltdown? Well, first off, of course they can. They're shipping food from a nuclear wasteland. They're trying to kill you. The joke's on you. Yeah, I'm definitely doing much better. I'm really totally shocked how good I'm starting to do. I'm not going to push my luck, of course, for another month or two. But I'm definitely doing way better. Feeling way better. And itching to kick the shit out of something to do with nuclear each day. So you can expect to see me a lot. The only way I can get my kicks off, unfortunately, right, you have to embrace the grind, because that's what I do, is a grind. You gotta work hard to tell this story day in, day out. Hugs for everybody. God bless everybody. Have a great night, a great day tomorrow. Tell your loved ones you love them, because you never know. Take care, folks. Okay, folks, if you made it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Have a great night and a great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Take care.